#Prince had a night of love with the waitress. Years later, he sees her with twins identical to him. Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. In a society where one's worth is measured by bloodlines rather than character, where marriages are brokered like cattle at market, and where a lady's reputation is as fragile as spun sugar, our tale begins. The year was 1815, and London was awash with celebration. Napoleon had been defeated, the season was in full bloom, and the town was abuzz with the return of its most glittering jewel, His Royal Highness, Prince Zachariah Xavier. Now, dear reader, you may wonder why I would begin our tale with a prince when royalty so often proves disappointing upon close inspection. But I assure you, Prince Zachariah was that rare creature, a royal who seemed to deserve his crown. Tall and broad-shouldered, with midnight black hair that curled rebelliously despite his valet's best efforts, and eyes the precise blue of a summer sky, he cut a figure that caused many a young debutante to reach for her smelling salts. "He's returned from the continent a hero," whispered Lady Featherington behind her fan at Lady Harcourt's ball. "They say he served incognito. I hear he slayed 10 Frenchmen with his saber alone," added her companion, eyes wide with admiration. What these ladies did not know, what nobody knew, was that Prince Zachariah was utterly, completely, bone-achingly tired of being Prince Zachariah. Another ball, another parade of eligible young ladies, he muttered to his closest friend and confidant, Lord Nicholas Pembroke, as they stood watching the swirl of satin and silk on the dance floor. If I am introduced to one more accomplished miss who can watercolor insipid landscapes and massacre Mozart on the pianoforte, I fear I may swim to France and beg Napoleon to take me prisoner. Lord Pembroke chuckled. "Your Royal Highness exaggerates. Surely there must be one lady who has caught your eye." Zachariah's gaze swept the ballroom, taking in the calculated simpers, the carefully rehearsed laughs, the eyes that saw not him but his title. "They don't see me, Nick. They see a crown, a castle, and royal progeny. I could be as dull as dishwater or mad as King George, and still they would pursue me with the same determined enthusiasm." What Prince Zachariah did not realize that evening was how dramatically his fate was about to change. For miles away in the small town of Bath, a young woman named Hannah Ellis was making a decision that would alter both their lives forever. Hannah Ellis was not the sort of young lady who normally crossed paths with royalty. The daughter of a respectable merchant who had died too young, leaving his family with too little, Hannah had done what genteel poverty often required of young women. She had found employment. The Bath Assembly Rooms employed her to serve refreshments during their less fashionable afternoons, when the truly elite were not in attendance, and thus would not be scandalized by seeing a gently bred young woman in service. Hannah was what discerning gentlemen might call a diamond of the first water, though her brilliance was hidden beneath a modest server's uniform. Hair the color of burnished copper was twisted severely away from a heart-shaped face, with eyes of clearest emerald. She moved with natural grace among Bath's second-tier society, invisible yet observing all, her quick mind cataloging the absurdities of those who considered themselves her betters. "Ellis, mind you don't spill that punch on Mrs. Worthington. She's wearing her new silk from London and would never let us hear the end of it." Hannah nodded at her supervisor, carefully balancing the heavy punch bowl. "Yes, Mrs. Tibbet." What no one knew, not even sensible Mrs. Tibbet, was that Hannah harbored secret ambitions. Each night, by candlelight, she wrote clever, biting observations of society, little sketches of character that she hoped might someday earn her a living by her pen rather than her tray-carrying abilities. The paths of our prince and our serving girl might never have crossed had it not been for the most powerful force in the universe, a royal mother's determination to see her son married. Bath. Prince Zachariah stared at his mother, Queen Charlotte, with unconcealed horror. "Whatever for?" "The waters, my dear," the Queen replied, calmly sipping her tea in her private apartments. "My rheumatism troubles me, and the physicians recommend Bath. As my most dutiful son, you will accompany me. But the season will continue without you for 2 weeks," she finished firmly. "Besides, I understand several very eligible families have removed to Bath for the same purpose. The Edgeworths will be there with their lovely daughter, Lady Penelope." Zachariah suppressed a groan. Lady Penelope Edgeworth had the personality of a particularly dull teaspoon and a laugh like a startled goose. "I live to serve your majesty," he said with only the faintest trace of irony. The queen's eyes twinkled. "Indeed you do. We leave tomorrow." And so it was that Prince Zachariah found himself in Bath, accompanying his mother to the pump room each morning and trying to avoid Lady Penelope each afternoon. It was on one such afternoon of tactical evasion that he slipped away from his royal guards, a favorite pastime, and discovered the lower assembly rooms hosting a modest musical performance. Finding himself blissfully unrecognized among Bath's less exalted society, Zachariah settled into a chair near the back, sighing with relief at the blessed anonymity. And that, dear reader, is when fate delivered Hannah Ellis directly into his path, quite literally. "Oh," Hannah gasped as she tripped, sending her tray of lemonade glasses flying directly toward the handsome stranger. With reflexes honed on the battlefield, Zachariah caught her by the waist, steadying her while somehow managing to catch the tray with his free hand. The glasses slid but did not fall. Time seemed to stop as their eyes met. "I beg your pardon, sir," Hannah said, her cheeks flushing beautifully as she regained her footing. "How terribly clumsy of me." "On the contrary," Zachariah replied, still holding the tray out to her. "I'd say that was rather skillfully done. Not everyone can create such an elegant diversion when they wish to make a gentleman's acquaintance." Hannah's eyes widened, then narrowed with a spark of indignation that Zachariah found utterly captivating. "I assure you, sir, if I wished to make your acquaintance, I would simply introduce myself like a civilized person rather than assault you with refreshments." "A pity," he said, his lips quirking into a genuine smile, "the first in months. I find I rather enjoy being assaulted by beautiful women bearing lemonade." Hannah took the tray, her fingers brushing his. "Then you must lead a very interesting life, mister?" For one mad moment, Zachariah considered giving his real name, but the freedom of anonymity was too precious to surrender. "Zachary," he said, using the name he had adopted during his military service. "Zachary Smith." One delicate copper eyebrow arched skeptically. "How original. And you are?" "Late returning to my duties, Mr. Smith. Good day." As she turned to leave, Zachariah felt a most unfamiliar sensation, the fear of never seeing someone again. "Wait," he called, just loudly enough for her to hear. "Might I know your name?" "For symmetry's sake." Hannah hesitated, then offered over her shoulder. "Ellis. Hannah Ellis." And with that, she was gone, disappearing into the crowd with her tray of lemonade, leaving Prince Zachariah Xavier utterly enchanted for the first time in his privileged life. The royal visit to Bath was meant to last 2 weeks. By the end of the first week, Zachariah had contrived to visit the lower assembly rooms no fewer than 5 times, each time in increasingly elaborate disguises to evade his guards. Hannah, for her part, had gone from bemused to exasperated to reluctantly charmed by the persistence of Mr. Smith. "You realize," she said during a stolen moment behind a potted palm, "that your disguises are ridiculous. A false mustache does not constitute a new identity. And yet you recognized me instantly," he countered. "I find that significant. It signifies only that I have functioning eyesight, sir." "And that your eyes have been seeking me out," he replied with a triumphant grin. Hannah rolled her eyes, but could not entirely suppress her smile. "Your arrogance knows no bounds, Mr. Smith. Is it arrogance to hope? To dream? To wish that the most intelligent, forthright woman of my acquaintance might spare me a few moments of conversation away from these stuffy rooms? It is arrogance to assume I have no better use of my time than to entertain a gentleman of obvious wealth and privilege who amuses himself by playing at being common." Zachariah's smile faltered. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" Hannah's expression softened slightly. "I think you are hiding something, Mr. Smith, or perhaps from something. And while I find you diverting company, I am not in a position to indulge in mysteries." "Then let me dispel the mystery," he said impulsively. "Meet me tomorrow evening. There's to be a public concert in Sydney Gardens. We could walk, talk. Perhaps you might come to see that my interest is genuine." Hannah hesitated. Every instinct told her to refuse. And yet, there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that belied his playful manner. "I finish my duties at 7, she said finally. I could perhaps arrive by past. The smile that broke across Zachariah's face was like the sun emerging from clouds. I shall count every minute until then, Miss Ellis. Little did either of them know that their garden rendezvous would lead to a night that would change the course of both their lives. The evening in Sydney Gardens began innocently enough. Hannah arrived in her best dress, a modest blue muslin that brought out the flame in her hair. Zachariah waited by the entrance, having discarded his absurd disguises in favor of simple but well-cut gentleman's attire that concealed its royal tailoring. They walked, they talked, they listened to the orchestra. Hannah discovered that Mr. Smith possessed a keen mind beneath his charm, with thoughtful opinions on everything from politics to poetry. Zachariah found himself captivated by Hannah's quick wit and refreshing honesty. As darkness fell and the crowd thinned, they found themselves alone on a secluded garden path. "You never did tell me what brings you to Bath, Mr. Smith," Hannah said, her voice soft in the gathering dusk. "My mother. Her health. Though I begin to think it was fate instead," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "You don't strike me as a man who believes in fate." "I didn't, until I met you." Hannah laughed, but it was a gentle sound, without mockery. "Now you are being absurd. We've known each other a week." "Sometimes a week is sufficient," he said, stepping closer. "Sometimes a moment is enough to recognize something extraordinary." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with possibility. Hannah knew she should step back, maintain propriety, protect herself from what was surely a passing fancy for a bored gentleman. And yet she found herself motionless, drawn to him like a moth to flame. "Hannah," he whispered, her name on his lips a caress. What happened next, dear reader, I shall leave partially to your imagination, for propriety must be observed even in storytelling. Let us say only that the magic of the gardens, the music drifting on the night air, and the undeniable attraction between them led to a night of passion neither had anticipated, but both would remember forever. Dawn found them saying goodbye, both believing they would meet again the following evening. Zachariah pressed a tender kiss to Hannah's palm, unwilling to let her go. "Until tonight," he promised. But fate, having brought them together, now conspired to tear them apart. Zachariah returned to his lodgings to find the Queen had suffered a turn in the night. The royal physician insisted on an immediate return to London. "But I must send word. There is someone," Zachariah protested as servants packed in haste around him. "Your Royal Highness, there is no time," his private secretary insisted. "The carriage is waiting, and your mother's health must take precedence." And so Prince Zachariah was whisked away to London, leaving only a hastily scribbled note with instructions for its delivery to Miss Hannah Ellis at the lower assembly rooms. A note that, through a series of unfortunate circumstances involving a careless footman, a sudden downpour, and ultimately a hungry goat, never reached its intended recipient. Hannah waited that night in Sydney Gardens until the last lantern was extinguished. She returned the next night, and the next, until the royal party's departure from Bath was reported in the local newspaper, complete with an engraving of the royal family that left her in no doubt as to the true identity of her Mr. Smith. "A prince," she whispered, staring at the likeness of Prince Zachariah Xavier. "I gave myself to a prince who couldn't even tell me his real name." 2 months later, Hannah Ellis discovered she was with child, or rather, with children, for nature, not content with the complications already in play, had decided to bless her with twins. With her reputation at stake and no way to contact the royal father, Hannah made the difficult decision to leave Bath. With the small inheritance from her father and her modest savings, she established herself in a cottage on the outskirts of a village in Hampshire, giving herself out to be a young widow, Mrs. Hannah Ellis, whose husband had died heroically at Waterloo. The twins, Alexander and Albert, were born healthy and strong, with their father's striking blue eyes and dark curls. As they grew, the resemblance became undeniable. Hannah both treasured and feared it, seeing the man she had loved and lost reflected daily in her sons' faces. "Mama, tell us about father again," 5-year-old Alexander would beg at bedtime. "Was he very brave?" Albert would chime in, and Hannah would weave tales of a brave soldier named Zachary who had fought for England, who had loved their mother very much, but who had been called away to serve his country before he knew he was to be a father. It was, she told herself, not entirely a lie. Meanwhile, Prince Zachariah had returned to London and his royal duties with a heaviness of heart that mystified the ton. "The prince seems positively melancholic," observed Lady Whistledown in her gossip sheet. "One wonders what, or who, he left behind in Bath." Despite his mother's increasing pressure to choose a bride, Zachariah found himself unable to put Hannah from his mind. He had sent men to Bath to find her, only to discover she had disappeared without a trace. "Perhaps it is time to accept she does not wish to be found," Lord Pembroke suggested gently after the latest failed inquiry. "A woman who truly wished to contact you could have done so." Zachariah shook his head. "You didn't know her, Nick. Something happened. I feel it in my bones." Years passed. The twins grew into handsome, spirited boys of 7. Hannah had built a quiet life for them, supporting her small family by writing children's stories under a pseudonym, stories that had become surprisingly popular among the fashionable set, though none knew the author was a fallen woman with royal bastards for sons. And then came the royal tour. "His Royal Highness Prince Zachariah will be visiting Hampshire next month," announced Hannah's neighbor, Mrs. Winters, during afternoon tea. "They say he's to stay with the Duke of Hampshire at Thornfield Hall. Imagine, royalty in our little corner of England." Hannah's teacup clattered against its saucer. "How interesting," she managed. "They say he's still unmarried," continued Mrs. Winters, oblivious to Hannah's distress. "Every eligible lady for miles will be throwing herself in his path. There's to be a public celebration in the village square, with all the local children presenting flowers. You must bring the boys, Hannah. It will be the highlight of their young lives." Hannah nodded numbly, her mind racing. She could not risk Zachariah seeing the twins. Their resemblance to him was too marked, too obvious to anyone with eyes. And yet, to keep them away would arouse suspicion in a village already too curious about the mysterious widow and her fatherless sons. The day of the royal visit dawned bright and clear. Hannah dressed the twins in their best clothes, her stomach knotted with anxiety. "Now remember, boys," she instructed as they walked to the village, "you are to stay close to me at all times. The crowds will be terrible, and I don't want to lose you." "Yes, Mama," they chorused, though their excited bouncing suggested her warnings fell on deaf ears. The village square was transformed. Bunting hung from every window, and a makeshift stage had been erected where Prince Zachariah would greet the populace. Hannah positioned herself and the boys near the back of the crowd, hoping to glimpse the proceedings without being seen. A fanfare announced the royal arrival. The crowd surged forward with excitement, and in that moment, disaster struck. Alexander, determined to see the prince, wriggled free of Hannah's grasp and darted into the crowd. Albert, unwilling to be left behind, followed his brother. Albert, come back," Hannah cried, pushing desperately through the crush of bodies. But the boys were quick, and the crowd unyielding. On the stage, Prince Zachariah Xavier stood waving to his subjects, his smile practiced, but his eyes scanning the crowd as they always did, still searching after all these years for a glimpse of copper hair and green eyes. And then, through a momentary parting of the crowd, he saw them, 2 small boys with his own face, pushing their way determinedly toward the stage. The world seemed to stop. Zachariah froze mid-wave, his eyes fixed on the children. 7 years old, he calculated automatically. The timing, it couldn't be coincidence. "Your Royal Highness?" the Duke of Hampshire murmured beside him. "Is something amiss?" Without answering, Zachariah strode to the edge of the stage, his eyes never leaving the boys. They had reached the front now and were staring up at him with identical expressions of wonder. "You look just like us," Alexander blurted out, causing a ripple of laughter in the crowd. Zachariah knelt down, bringing himself to their level. "What are your names?" he asked, his voice remarkably steady despite the thundering of his heart. "I'm Alexander Ellis, and this is my brother Albert," said the bolder of the two. "Our father was a soldier who died at Waterloo." "Did you fight at Waterloo too?" Zachariah felt as though he'd been struck. "Ellis." The surname was like a physical blow. "Alexander." "Albert." A frantic female voice called from the crowd, and then she was there. Hannah Ellis, 7 years older but unmistakable, pushing through to grab her son's hands. "I'm so sorry, Your Highness, they got away from me." Their eyes met, and the world around them seemed to fade away. "Hannah," he breathed, rising slowly to his feet. Her face had gone white. "Your Royal Highness," she curtsied, trying to pull the boys back into the crowd. "We apologize for the interruption." "Mama, look." Albert tugged at her skirt. "He knows your name." The crowd had gone eerily silent, sensing the undercurrent of drama unfolding before them. Zachariah was distantly aware of his advisors shifting uncomfortably behind him, of the Duke clearing his throat, of the potential scandal brewing with every passing second. He did not care. "I've been looking for you," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed square. "For 7 years, I've been looking for you." Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know how to find you. And then when the boys—" She glanced down at her sons, who were looking between the adults with growing confusion. Understanding dawned on Alexander's young face first. "Mama," he said slowly, "is the prince our father? Is that why we look like him?" A collective gasp went up from the crowd. The Duke of Hampshire looked as though he might faint. Zachariah's private secretary was already calculating the public relations disaster unfolding before him. But Zachariah saw only Hannah and the boys, his family, found at last. "Yes," he said firmly, loud enough for all to hear. "I am your father, and I have been searching for you and your mother since before you were born." He stepped down from the stage and approached them, ignoring the shocked murmurs of the crowd. Kneeling before the boys, he looked from one to the other in wonder. "I did not know about you," he said gently. "If I had, nothing in heaven or earth would have kept me from you." He looked up at Hannah, whose tears were flowing freely now. "I went back to the gardens every night. I left a note. I never received it," she whispered. "I waited for you. When I realized who you really were, I thought it had all been a game to you." Zachariah shook his head vehemently. "Never. What we shared was the most real thing in my life. When I lost you, I lost my heart." He rose and took her hands in his, uncaring of the hundreds of eyes upon them. "Hannah Ellis, I have loved you from the moment you nearly doused me with lemonade. These past 7 years have been a half-life without you. Now I find not only you, but 2 magnificent sons as well. Please tell me it's not too late for us." Hannah stared at him, torn between joy and disbelief. "But you're a prince," she protested weakly. "I'm nobody, a servant, a fallen woman." "You're everything," he interrupted fiercely. "You're the woman I love, the mother of my children, and if you'll have me, my future wife." The collective intake of breath from the crowd might have emptied Hampshire of air entirely. "Wife," Hannah echoed, certain she had misheard. Zachariah smiled, that same genuine smile that had first captured her heart in Bath. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, the Prince of England dropped to one knee before a simple widow and her illegitimate sons. "Hannah Ellis, will you do me the very great honor of becoming my wife? Of allowing me the privilege of being a father to our sons? Of making me the happiest man in England, in Europe, in the entire world?" For a moment, Hannah couldn't speak. Then she felt small hands on her skirts, her sons, looking up at her with hopeful eyes. "Say yes, Mama," Albert whispered. "Please say yes." Hannah looked from her boys to their father, this man who had found her against all odds, who was offering her everything she had never dared to dream of. "Yes," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Yes, I will marry you, Zachariah." He rose and swept her into his arms, kissing her before the entire village, propriety be damned. The crowd erupted into cheers. Scandal transformed in an instant to the greatest romance England had witnessed in a generation. The twins looked on in confusion mingled with delight as their mother was kissed by a prince, their father, while around them, the villagers who had whispered behind Hannah's back for years now wept and applauded as though they'd supported her all along. The royal wedding took place 6 months later, after a whirlwind of preparations, official recognitions of the twins as royal heirs, and the Queen Mother's surprisingly swift acceptance of her future daughter-in-law. "Any woman who could capture my son's heart so completely must be extraordinary indeed," she declared upon meeting Hannah. Hannah Ellis became Princess Hannah. The twins became Princes Alexander and Albert, and the ton buzzed for years about the unprecedented romance. Lady Whistledown's column on the royal nuptials was framed and displayed in homes across England. As for Prince Zachariah and his bride, They retired to the royal apartments on their wedding night with the satisfied exhaustion of two people who had found their way back to each other against impossible odds. I still can't quite believe it, Hannah murmured as she lay in her husband's arms. That first night in Bath, if someone had told me I would someday be a princess, you would have laughed in their face, Zachariah finished for her, pressing a kiss to her temple. It's one of the things I love most about you. You never wanted a prince. You just wanted me. I still just want you, she replied, drawing him closer. The rest is just trimmings. And what about our boys? Are they just trimmings too? He teased. Hannah's face softened. They're the greatest gift I never knew to ask for. And watching you with them these past months, her voice caught. You're a wonderful father, Zachariah. I had excellent material to work with, he said proudly. They're extraordinary children, though I fear Albert may have inherited my penchant for escaping his guardians. Hannah laughed. Both of them did. Heaven help the royal household. Heaven help England when they come of age, Zachariah agreed. Then, more seriously, I've been thinking perhaps we should give them a sister. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Already planning our family's expansion, Your Highness? I've lost 7 years with you, he said, drawing her closer. I intend to make up for every minute. And so, dear reader, ends our tale of the prince and the serving girl, of love lost and found, of twins who united a family that fate had divided. Their story would be told for generations, embellished and romanticized until it became legend, the truest of fairy tales, for it actually happened. Princess Hannah would go on to champion education for girls of all classes. Prince Zachariah would reform the monarchy's approach to the common people. The twins would grow into fine young men who combined their father's nobility with their mother's compassionate wisdom. And the royal nursery would indeed welcome a princess the following year, a copper-haired, blue-eyed beauty named Charlotte, after her grandmother, who had unwittingly set the entire story in motion with her rheumatism and her trip to Bath. In drawing rooms across England, whenever cynical souls declared true love a fantasy, someone would inevitably cite the prince and his Hannah as proof that, sometimes, love finds a way. That sometimes, a chance meeting, a spilled lemonade, and a night in a garden can change the course of history itself. And isn't that, after all, what we all hope for?